Ladies and gentlemen, I am Andrew Huberman, and I want you to enjoy your life and become who God created you to be. If you truly want a positive change in your life, don't just listen, take action. Like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you can receive more inspiring messages. There's a hidden switch inside your brain, a switch that determines how you think, how you feel, and what you believe is possible for your life. Most people go their entire lives without realizing that this switch is not fixed by genetics or past experiences. It is shaped and reshaped every single day by the way you talk to yourself. Science now shows that your words, your thoughts, and even the emotions you pair with them literally sculpt your brain's wiring, a phenomenon known as neuroplasticity. You are not a prisoner of your past patterns. You are an active architect of your future mind. Now imagine if you could hit reset on your brain, not by erasing who you are, but by layering new strength, new focus, and new possibilities over everything you've ever known. Imagine reshaping the core of how you react, how you believe, and how you move through the world, not in years, but in just 3 powerful days. It's not fantasy, it's biology. When you direct your attention, your language, and your emotions with deliberate action for even a short period of time, you initiate deep rewiring inside the circuits that govern your habits, your confidence, and your resilience. This isn't about empty motivation or surface level positivity. It's about engaging with the real science of how the brain works, understanding that with the right tools and the right focus, you can create a new version of yourself faster than you ever believed possible. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through exactly how to do it, how to use self-talk as a tool for neuroplasticity, how the 3-day rule can jumpstart a permanent reset, how aligning your daily rhythms, morning, midday, and night, multiplies your progress, how emotional intensity strengthens your wiring, and why resetting your mind isn't about erasing the old, but about overwriting it with something stronger, wiser, and more alive. You are far more capable of transformation than you realize. The science proves it. Today, you're going to learn exactly how to turn that science into your personal power. Your brain is an incredible living system. It's not static, it's not fixed, and it doesn't stop developing once you reach adulthood. Thanks to a phenomenon called neuroplasticity, your brain is capable of changing its structure and function based on your experiences, your behaviors, and, critically, your focus. What you consistently focus on gets wired in more strongly. What you ignore, your brain prunes away. It's like a dynamic, ongoing construction project happening inside your skull every day. And the most powerful tool you have to direct that construction is something you already do all the time. Talk to yourself. Self-talk is often treated lightly, as if it's just a psychological exercise to boost your mood. But it's actually a mechanism that directly instructs your brain on how to reconfigure its circuits. When you repeatedly tell yourself, I can't do this, I'm not good enough, I always mess things up, those statements aren't just momentary feelings. They trigger neural firing patterns that strengthen the circuits related to fear, doubt, hesitation, and anxiety. No more. The more you talk to yourself negatively, the more robust and efficient those circuits become, making it easier for your brain to access those same negative emotions the next time you face a challenge. On the flip side, positive and intentional self-talk activates circuits linked to confidence, focus, problem solving, and emotional regulation. Telling yourself, I'm learning and improving, I can find a solution, or I am strong enough to handle this. When those neurons fire different sets of neurons, when those neurons fire together repeatedly, they wire together, creating a faster, more efficient pathway for positive, constructive thought patterns to emerge. It's not magic, it's biology. Your internal language patterns determine which parts of your brain you are exercising and strengthening day by day. This idea is backed by real neuroscience research. Studies using brain imaging techniques like fMRI have shown that self-affirmations, statements you say to yourself to affirm your worth, your capabilities, or your goals, actually engage parts of the brain involved in self-processing, such as the medial prefrontal cortex. This is the same part of the brain responsible for building your sense of identity. When you speak positively and purposefully to yourself, you aren't just trying to change your mood in the moment. You are literally reshaping how your brain defines who you are over time. Another important piece to understand is that your brain treats repeated internal statements almost the same way it treats repeated external experiences. If someone else constantly criticized you, over time, you would start to internalize that message and believe it. Similarly, when you criticize yourself internally, your brain logs it as real, valid feedback about your identity and your place in the world. When you speak to yourself like a mentor would, encouraging, supportive, challenging in a positive way, your brain begins to wire in those supportive narratives as your truth. The frequency and emotional intensity of your self-talk matter too. The more often you engage in intentional self-talk and the more emotionally connected you are to what you're saying, the stronger the neuroplastic changes will be. If you mumble a half-hearted, "I'm confident," while feeling completely defeated inside, the change will be minimal. But if you deliberately say, "I am capable of learning and succeeding," and connect emotionally to that idea, your brain will record it much more powerfully. Emotions act like a highlighter for the brain, marking certain experiences as especially important to remember and wire in. Think about it. Every single day, you are either reinforcing the same old circuits that keep you stuck, or you are building new ones that pull you forward. Your self-talk is the architect, the construction crew, and the blueprint for the brain you are going to live with tomorrow, next month, and next year. Choosing your words carefully is not just about feeling good in the moment. It's about setting the trajectory of your mind's development for the future. The idea that change takes years is one of the biggest myths about the brain. While mastering a new skill or developing deep expertise does take time, the brain is capable of starting a rewiring process much faster than most people realize. Neuroscience shows that focused, intentional effort over even short periods, sometimes as little as 3 days, can initiate measurable changes in the brain's circuitry. This is called short-term neuroplasticity, and it's the foundation for rapid transformation in thinking and behavior. The 3-day rule isn't just motivational hype. It's rooted in how our neurons adapt to repeated stimuli and focus. When you engage in new behaviors or thought patterns consistently and deliberately for a few days, you send a very clear signal to your brain. This matters. Strengthen this. Neurons that fire together begin to form stronger synaptic connections, a principle known as Hebb's rule. Cells that fire together wire together. Even after just 72 hours of consistent focus, the brain can begin to increase the efficiency and strength of those pathways. While the full remodeling of brain networks takes longer, the initial shift, the planting of the seed for lasting change, happens incredibly quickly. In practical terms, this means that if you commit to talking to yourself differently for just 3 days, deliberately, with emotion and consistency, you can start to weaken the old default patterns of negativity or self-doubt and lay the groundwork for new empowering thought circuits. It doesn't mean that 3 days will erase a lifetime of negative thinking, but it absolutely means that 3 days is enough to begin disrupting the old patterns and installing a new foundation. The first shifts are the hardest because you are working against the momentum of years of habitual thinking, but they are also the most powerful because the brain is highly sensitive to new, intense patterns of focus. Studies on habit formation and behavioral change support this too. When researchers have looked at the brain during the early phases of adopting a new habit, they notice that in the first few days, the brain is in a heightened state of neurochemical readiness. Levels of neurotrophic factors like BDNF, brain-directed neurotrophic factor, which support neuron growth and connection, increase when you are engaging in novel, effortful behaviors. This biological boost means that the brain is more plastic, more flexible, and more able to lay down new wiring. 3 days of intense, intentional practice can create an initial spike in BDNF levels that paves the way for ongoing change. Another critical reason why 3 days is a meaningful window has to do with attention and emotional engagement. Sustaining focused attention on a new behavior for a short, manageable period like 3 days is realistic for most people. The brain thrives on success signals. And when you can look back after 3 days and notice even small victories, slightly more positive thinking, a bit less self-criticism, a better ability to reframe challenges, you create a feedback loop that reinforces continued change. Momentum builds from success, not from struggle. Therefore, a concentrated 3-day effort can act as a catalyst, triggering a much longer and deeper transformation because you experience tangible evidence that change is possible. It's also important to recognize that the brain loves patterns and expects consistency. If you engage in positive self-talk sporadically, the signal to the brain is weak and confusing. But if you apply the same focus, the same phrases, the same emotional intensity over a continuous 3-day span, the brain begins to adapt. It says, this is real. This is the new normal. Adjust accordingly. In this way, the 3-day window functions almost like a shock wave, a sudden, intense input that grabs the brain's attention and initiates restructuring. Of course, continued repetition beyond 3 days will deepen and strengthen the new circuits, but the critical insight here is that you do not need to wait weeks or months to start feeling and seeing a shift. 3 days of focused, deliberate self-talk can create a neurological tipping point. It gives you a concrete, achievable starting line for changing the way you think, feel, and ultimately live. Most people assume that perception is purely a passive process. They think the brain simply records what's happening in the outside world like a camera. But that's not how perception actually works. Your brain doesn't experience reality directly. It interprets reality based on filters, past experiences, emotional states, and, crucially, the language you use internally. The words you speak to yourself act like a lens that shapes what you notice, what you ignore, what you fear, and what you move toward. Language is not just a description of your experience, it's the architect of it. When you repeatedly use certain phrases, your brain begins to bias your attention toward confirming those statements. If you often tell yourself, "I'm bad under pressure," your brain will selectively notice moments when you struggle and reinforce that identity. Even if you succeed occasionally under pressure, your brain will discount those successes because they don't fit the internal language pattern you've established. On the other hand, if you say, "I am learning to perform well under pressure," your brain will actively seek moments where you handle stress effectively, reinforcing a more adaptive and empowering self-concept. This happens because of a set of neural networks in the brain known as the salience network and the default mode network. The salience network determines what you pay attention to, while the default mode network is heavily involved in your sense of self. The language you use shapes both. When you repeatedly label yourself in a certain way through self-talk, you are literally tuning your salience network to prioritize evidence that matches your internal narrative. Your brain starts filtering information not based on objective reality, but based on the story you are telling yourself about who you are and what the world is like. It's also important to understand that language influences the emotional tone of your experiences. Saying "this is a disaster" triggers a very different emotional and physiological response than saying "this is a challenge." The words you choose set off cascades of neurotransmitters and hormonal changes. Negative, catastrophic language floods your body with cortisol, the stress hormone, tightening your muscles, narrowing your vision, and putting your brain into a defensive survival state. Positive, empowering language releases dopamine and serotonin, chemicals that enhance cognitive flexibility, creativity, and motivation. Simply put, the way you label a situation determines whether your brain approaches it with fear or with opportunity. In many ways, your internal language functions like a predictive system. Your brain is constantly trying to predict what's going to happen next based on previous patterns. If your self-talk is full of doubt, failure, and fear, your brain predicts those outcomes and prepares your body and mind accordingly, making those outcomes more likely. But if your language is full of hope, determination, and possibility, your brain predicts success and mobilizes your internal resources to achieve it. It's a self-fulfilling mechanism rooted in deep neurobiology. This is why short, powerful self-talk phrases can have such a profound effect, especially when repeated consistently. Even something as simple as saying, "I am adaptable," or "I can figure it out," creates a cascade of micro-perceptions where your brain spots options and solutions that would otherwise be invisible to you if your internal language was focused on being stuck or overwhelmed. Over time, these micro shifts add up to major changes in behavior, mindset, and outcomes. It's also worth noting that language doesn't have to be loud or dramatic to have an impact. The quiet, almost unconscious phrases you mutter under your breath or think when no one is around are the ones that often shape you the most. They are repeated hundreds, sometimes thousands of times, carving deep grooves into the neural architecture of your brain. Becoming aware of these automatic language patterns and deliberately shifting them is one of the most powerful ways to change your perception of reality at the root level. The key is not to wait until you feel different to use different language. You must use different language first and trust that your feelings and perceptions will eventually catch up. Your words are the steering wheel of your brain's focus and emotional state. When you change your language, you are not pretending things are different. You are programming your brain to make them different over time. The brain thrives on rhythm and repetition. It is deeply influenced by the cycles of the day, including when and how you focus your attention. If you want to rewire your mind quickly and effectively, aligning your self-talk and mental practices with specific times of the day can create a powerful multiplier effect. Morning, midday, and night are three natural checkpoints where the brain is especially primed for different kinds of plasticity. If you strategically insert intentional self-talk during these windows, you send clear, repeated signals that accelerate the rewiring process. The morning is the single most important window. Right after waking up, your brain is in a transitional state where it is moving from the deep restorative patterns of sleep into active wakefulness. In this state, brainwaves are slower in the theta and alpha range, meaning your mind is more suggestible and open to influence. What you think and say to yourself in the first 30 to 60 minutes after waking sets the tone for the entire day. Positive self-talk during this window acts like a virus that infects your focus and mood for hours. On the other hand, positive intentional self-talk programs the brain toward possibility, optimism, and resilience. Even just 2 to 5 minutes of focused self-talk immediately after waking, statements like "I am capable," "Today is full of opportunities," or "I approach challenges with calm and strength," can shift your baseline emotional state and direct your salience network toward constructive focus for the rest of the day. Finally, the nighttime window is where consolidation happens. During sleep, especially during deep non-REM stages, the brain replays and strengthens the patterns and information you engaged with most during the day. If the last thing you feed your mind before sleep is worry, fear, or frustration, your brain will consolidate those emotional and cognitive patterns. But if you deliberately engage in positive self-talk before bed, even a few simple affirmations, you prime your brain to strengthen the circuits you are trying to build. The emotional tone you set right before sleep matters because the brain's default mode network becomes highly active during sleep, integrating experiences and reinforcing beliefs about yourself and the world. Speaking to yourself with compassion, strength, and hope in those final minutes can dramatically shift what your brain holds on to and amplifies during the night. A daily protocol structured around morning activation, midday reinforcement, and nighttime consolidation is not about perfection or intensity. It's about consistency. It's about weaving deliberate, emotionally charged self-talk into the natural rhythm of your day, taking advantage of the brain's built-in plasticity windows. Just a few minutes at each checkpoint creates a layered effect where each session builds on the previous ones, amplifying the signals you are sending to your nervous system. Over time, this creates a cascading transformation where new thought patterns not only take root, but become the default way you experience yourself and the world. Not all experiences are treated equally by the brain. Some moments slip away unnoticed while others leave deep, lasting imprints. What makes the difference is not just repetition or focus, it's emotional intensity. When you engage your emotions during any activity, especially during self-talk and rewiring practices, you trigger chemical and structural changes in the brain that make the new circuit stronger, faster, and more resilient. Emotion acts like a neurochemical amplifier. It tells the brain, pay attention, this matters, wire this in. So at the neurobiological level, emotional intensity releases powerful modulators like norepinephrine, dopamine, and acetylcholine. These chemicals flood the synapses between neurons, making it easier for them to strengthen their connections. Think of emotions as turning up the volume on your brain's learning system. When you say something to yourself with conviction, passion, or deep feeling, the brain records that event with far greater fidelity than when you mutter it with disinterest. The more emotionally charged the experience, the more plasticity proteins your brain produces in the background to literally alter the structure of neural circuits. This is why simply repeating affirmations mechanically often fails. If you say, "I am confident," while feeling bored or disconnected, the brain doesn't register it as important. But if you summon even a small surge of real feeling, determination, hope, excitement, the phrase becomes a potent trigger for neuroplastic change. The emotional engagement signals to your brain that the experience is meaningful, and your brain is wired by evolution to prioritize and encode what it perceives as meaningful. There's also a powerful feedback loop that happens when you intentionally inject emotion into your self-talk. At first, you might have to summon the emotion manually, almost like an actor stepping into a role. But as the brain starts wiring the new circuits, the emotional response begins to emerge automatically. Telling yourself, "I can overcome challenges," while feeling a surge of pride or strength, strengthens not just the cognitive belief, but also the emotional muscle memory. Over time, facing difficulties can automatically trigger those positive, empowering emotional states because the wiring between thought and feeling has been reinforced through repeated, emotionally charged practice. It's also important to understand that emotional intensity doesn't mean overwhelming yourself. It's not about trying to generate fake enthusiasm or pretend everything is perfect. It's about connecting authentically to even a small ember of real emotion, courage, curiosity, hope, and fanning it slightly during your self-talk rituals. A slight emotional elevation is enough to initiate the neurochemical cascade that supports long-term change. Small, authentic emotions consistently applied will beat grand fake emotions every time when it comes to rewiring your brain. In many ways, emotional intensity acts as a sorting mechanism for the brain. Experiences and thoughts that are emotionally neutral tend to fade into the background. They're not prioritized for memory or structural change. But those that carry emotional weight, even mild but consistent weight, are tagged by the brain as important. They get replayed more during rest, consolidated more deeply during sleep, and recalled more readily during future challenges. This is why connecting genuine feeling to your self-talk, even if it's just slight but real, can transform it from empty words into a biological rewiring event. Another fascinating aspect is that emotional intensity doesn't only amplify positive rewiring, negative emotions can also deeply ingrain circuits, which is why unchecked negative self-talk can become so entrenched. If you beat yourself up emotionally while criticizing yourself, your brain wires that self-criticism deeply. This means emotional intensity is a double-edged sword, but when used deliberately and positively, it becomes your most powerful ally. Instead of letting emotions randomly sculpt your brain, you can channel them intentionally to reinforce the person you are becoming. By combining intentional self-talk with authentic emotional engagement, even small daily practices become deeply transformative. Emotional intensity is the difference between temporary change and permanent transformation. It turns fleeting thoughts into lasting identity. It forges new circuits that are not fragile, but resilient, durable, and automatic over time. One of the biggest misconceptions about changing your mind or your habits is the idea that you need to erase the old patterns completely. In reality, the brain doesn't work like a whiteboard that can be wiped clean. Instead, it works like a layered system. Old patterns may remain in the background, but you can build stronger, more dominant pathways over them through intentional action. Resetting your mind is not about deleting who you used to be. It's about overwriting old circuits with new, more powerful ones that eventually take control of your behavior, your focus, and your sense of self. Neuroscience shows that once a neural pathway is built, it doesn't simply disappear. Even when you form new habits or beliefs, the old pathways remain to some extent. But the brain is always competing for efficiency. It defaults to using the pathways that are fastest, strongest, and most frequently activated. So if you consistently activate new circuits with focused self-talk, emotion, and behavior, those circuits will become the primary routes your brain uses. The old patterns will still exist, but will grow weaker from disuse, becoming like overgrown trails in a forest, still there but rarely traveled. This understanding removes a lot of unnecessary frustration. You don't have to fight or obsess over erasing every trace of your old habits or thought patterns. You don't have to fear moments of regression or occasional old thoughts popping up. That doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're human and working within the natural rules of how neuroplasticity functions. The key is to consistently and deliberately choose the new pathway until it becomes the default choice. Each time you choose the new response, even when the old urge is present, you strengthen the wiring of your new identity. It's also critical to realize that overriding happens through action, not just intention. Thinking about changing is not enough to create a real reset. Acting in alignment with your new self-talk, even in small ways, sends a stronger rewiring signal than thinking alone. The brain changes most robustly when behavior, emotion, and thought are synchronized. Saying, "I am resilient," is powerful when you feel it and act it, when you keep going despite difficulty, even if it's messy and imperfect. The convergence of thought, feeling, and action creates the strongest overriding effect. There's a concept in neuroscience called long-term potentiation, which refers to the strengthening of synapses based on recent patterns of activity. This means that every time you activate a new pattern, every time you talk to yourself with belief, focus your attention positively, or act according to your new standards, you make it easier for your brain to activate that pattern again in the future. Over time, The repetition of this process physically changes the structure of your brain, reinforcing the new wiring, while the old wiring becomes harder and harder to access automatically. So another powerful realization is that old patterns can serve as reminders of how far you've come, not as evidence of failure. When an old negative thought or impulse arises, you can use it as a cue to double down on your new wiring. Instead of fearing it, you can recognize it as the last echoes of a system that is being replaced. You are not starting over every time an old feeling surfaces. You are continuing the process of layering new, stronger circuits on top of the old. Resetting, in this sense, is a process of renewal, not destruction. It's building something new that is so compelling, so strong, and so frequently activated that the brain naturally prefers it. Overriding is powerful because it respects the way the brain actually works. It acknowledges that change is an additive process, a layering of new strength, new focus, and new identity until it becomes the path of least resistance. Through consistent, emotionally engaged, behaviorally aligned action, you don't need to erase who you were. You simply build something better, stronger, and more alive over it. And that new system gradually becomes who you are.